Now to start, I thought we'd do a bit of an experiment. So I've got a word that I'm going to put on the screen, and your job is to think of a word that relates to that word, okay? It's not too hard, just think of the first one that comes to your mind. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, here's my word. You ready? Generosity. Okay, so what did people think? Anyone got an answer? An idea? What's the abundance? Okay, cool. Kindness. Love. Giving. Money. Anyone else think of money? Anyone else think of giving? Oh yeah, good. We'll have lots of givers by the end of... No, I'm joking. I think for most people, I would argue in the church, most people in the church, the word that immediately comes to mind when we talk about generosity, and it was certainly true at the 9 a.m. service, was money or giving or sometimes time. So we often talk about money, time, and maybe our talents. Well, this morning we're going to talk about none of those. Despite the readings being a lot about those, we're going to talk about something quite different, and I'll step you through. But some of you may have heard this story before, but you might not have heard the background. So I was a youth leader in Christchurch. That was how I first kind of got into ministry. It was at a church called St. Timothy's in Burnside, and I think some people have links to that church here. I was there for 6 years, 11 months, and I was really gutted about that because my youth pastor, who I grew up, was there for 7 years, 1 month, and I didn't beat him, so I'm very, But about 2 years into my 7 years there, I had one of the most horrific experiences that I can remember. I got called into a meeting with the vicar and the head of the building committee, which is never a good sign. And we just had a youth sleepover for the 40-hour famine. We decided to do the challenge that year of not using any power for 40 hours. So that meant cell phones were out, a whole bunch of other things were out. We had people come to church and we were playing games without power for most of the day. We spent some time in the park across the road. And it got late, and of course, you can't see during the night. So we had to do something different. We actually used these. And so we lit some candles. And the other part of the sleepover was that we had some boxes to live in for the evening. You can probably see where this is going. The next morning we were going to finish early before church and have breakfast together before we then went to church in the morning. Now, nothing actually happened. No incident happened that night. But at this moment, so it's late, we've lit the candles, there's boxes around. At this moment, the head of the building committee walked into church. He was also a musician, and so he was coming to sort out the music for the next morning. And he walked in and he found us there. And he didn't really say much to us at the time, and we just kind of walked away. And then the next week, I was called into a meeting with the vicar and the head of the building committee, which is never really a good way to do conflict. If you have conflict with someone, then I'd imagine you want to talk to them rather than just, oh, don't pull me into your conflict. Like, that's not a good idea. What I didn't realise when I walked into that meeting was there was a whole heap of other things that had been unsaid. There's a whole heap of other conflicts. As a youth group, we'd broke lights. As a youth group, we had left doors unlocked when we left. We had some young people who were smoking outside at night. Basically, this whole plethora of things came out to the meeting, which I was not expecting, because I was expecting to talk about the candles and the boxes. Now, I don't remember what I said, and I'm sure I wasn't entirely blameless in this meeting. Me and the committee member had a very checkered past, and we had not got on well together the whole time I'd been there. Which kind of made sense of the next words that came out of his mouth, which were, "You are the worst youth leader we've ever had." Now, I'm sure I'd done some things wrong, and as I said, we'd done some things as a youth group, and I know some nights we'd broken stuff, we'd left things unlocked, and probably all manner of other things. But when I looked at other youth groups across the city in our Anglican context, and when we met up with them, we were doing quite well. We had young people that no other Anglican youth group was reaching, hence why we had people smoking outside. We were quite healthy. We were one of the bigger youth groups in the city, and we had approximately 30 to 40 people there most nights. We had about 60 on our roll, and when we looked around the city at other Anglican youth groups, we were doing pretty well. But these words stuck with me. They kind of were on like a sticker. And I was someone who often thought I was not meant to be where I was. I was a bit of an imposter. I was someone who had multiple times felt that I was no good at my job. I felt, for me in that moment, it was probably one of the worst things to hear, because I'd already felt all these things inside, and I was telling myself all these lies about how I was working, and then this kind of just confirmed it. Now, I've improved a lot for sure in this kind of area. I still have doubts often. I still feel like an imposter often. But what I needed to hear in that moment was that I was doing okay. I was doing okay in that moment. There were many things we were doing right. Sure, we had things to improve, but that's what I needed to hear. I needed encouragement, and I received critique. When we looked at our readings, we had Acts and then we had Luke. In our Acts reading, we find a remarkable story of generosity. It's kind of like a utopian kind of world out there, where there's all these people coming to know Jesus, and they are just laying things at the apostles' feet, selling things and laying possessions at the apostles' feet, and the apostles are kind of distributing it as people had need. They were unified together, one heart and one mind, it says. And it's kind of this miraculous sharing of everything they had to help each other out. A beautiful picture, and one I think probably I'd love to emulate. You know, how can we together pool our resources so no one is in need? But that's not the bit I want to focus on from the Acts reading. At the end of it, we hear about this character who embodied that reality. He sold a field and he gave the money to be used by the church for good. He laid it at the apostles' feet and said, "You use it." But what I find most interesting about this guy called Joseph, who's a Levite, is the apostles named him Barnabas. So they didn't look at him and name him because of the money he got or the generosity he gave. They named him as the encourager. So his generosity was great, but his encouragement was what his reputation led to. Now, if you read on in the book of Acts, you'll find that he did 4 other things mainly in the book of Acts. He introduces the converted Saul to Paul. He introduces him to the disciples. He's the one, the disciples are scared, and he's the one who says, "No, come and meet this guy, he's a changed person." That's Barnabas. Barnabas then brings Paul. When Barnabas lands in Antioch, he finds a whole heap of people there who are following Jesus' way. And he's like, "We need someone to help encourage them. I'll go get my friend Paul, and I'll bring Paul." And they spend a lot of time there encouraging the disciples in Antioch. Barnabas then travels with Paul all throughout Asia Minor, encouraging churches, leaning into them, establishing churches throughout that area on their mission trip. And then when Paul and Mark fall out, it is Barnabas who goes with Mark, and Paul goes with Silas. And they go off together on separate mission trips. So he picks Mark up even when Paul thinks he isn't any good because he deserted them on a previous mission trip. Barnabas, this character of Barnabas, changed hundreds of lives simply by choosing to be generous with his encouragement. And yet, as we read, it's the least costly thing he does. There's a very famous Bible passage. It says, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples." It's Jesus talking, and if you do this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another. My thing about being in New Zealand and loving others is being generous with our words. In New Zealand, we talk a lot about tall poppy syndrome, about bringing others down, about no one can rise above, no one can be good at anything because we just kind of cut them down at the first moment we get. So I believe there's real power and hope to being generous with our words. In fact, that's what we see Jesus doing in our reading from Luke. Zacchaeus climbs a tree, he wants to see Jesus, and Jesus goes right up to him and says, "Today I'll dine at your place." And he's all very nervous about this because he's been the chief tax collector, so he's hated by Jews. And Jesus, he ends up declaring, "Look, I'll give everything back." Meeting Jesus changes his life. And he gives everything back. And then what does Jesus say? Jesus restores the man to the image of God. He says, salvation has come to this house too because he is also a child of Abraham. He's rightfully put him back into the community. He's restored his mana, he's built him up and put him back in relationship with his people. That's the way of Jesus, I think. He's about restoration. So to be his disciples requires us all to emulate that quality. So to illustrate my point, I've got a book here, and we read this book a lot at home. And some of you will probably have read this book. But I'm going to read it to you now, and you can follow along, because here's the pictures on the screen. The Wemmicks were small wooden people, and all of the wooden people were carved by the woodworker named Eli. His workshop sat on a hill overlooking their village. Each Wemmick was different. Some had big noses, others had large eyes. Some were tall, others were short. Some wore hats, others wore coats. But all were made by the same carver, and all lived in the village. All day, every day, the Wemmicks did the same thing. They gave each other stickers. And each Wemmicks had a box of golden star stickers and a box of grey dot stickers. Up and down the streets all over the city, people spent their days sticking stars or dots on one another. The pretty ones, those with smooth wood and fine paint, always got stars. But if the wood was rough or the paint chipped, the Wemmick gave dots. The talented ones got stars too. Some could lift big high sticks high above their heads or jump over tall boxes. Others knew big words or could sing pretty songs. Everyone gave them stars. Some Wemmicks had stars all over them. And every time they got a star, it made them feel so good. It made them want to do something else and get another star. Others, though, could do little. They got dots. Punchinello was one of these. He tried to jump high like the others, but he always fell. And when he fell, the others would gather around him and give him dots. Sometimes when he fell, his wood got scratched, so the people would give him more dots. And then when he tried to explain why he'd fallen, he would say something silly, and the Wemmicks would give him even more dots. After a while, he had so many dots that he didn't want to go outside. He was afraid he would do something silly, such as forget his hat or step in the water. And then people would give him another dot. In fact, he had so many grey dots that some people came up and gave him dots for no reason at all. He deserves a lot of dots, the wooden people would agree with one another. He's not a good wooden person. After a while, Punchinello believed them. "I'm not a good Wemmick," he would say. The few times he went outside, he hung around with other Wemmicks who also had lots of dots, and he felt better around them. One day, he met a Wemmick who was unlike any he'd ever met. She had no dots or stars. She was just wooden. Her name was Lucia. It wasn't that people didn't try to give her stickers, it was just that the stickers didn't stick. Some of the Wemmicks admired Lucia for having no dots, so they would run up to her and give her a star. But it would fall off. Others looked down on her for having no stars, so they would give her a dot, but they wouldn't stick either. That's the way I want to be, thought Punchinello. I don't want anyone's marks. So he asked the stickerless Wemmick, how did she do it? It's easy, Lucia replied. Every day I go to see Eli. Eli? Yes, Eli, the woodcarver. I sit in the workshop with him. Why? Why don't you go find out for yourself? Go up the hill. He's there. And with that, the Wemmick who had no stickers turned and skipped away. But will he want to see me? Punchinello cried out. Lucia didn't hear, so Punchinello went home. He He sat near a window and watched the wooden people as they scurried around, giving each other stars and dots. It's not right, he muttered to himself, and he decided to go and see Eli. He walked up the narrow path to the top of the hill and stepped into the big shop. His wooden eyes widened at the size of everything. The stool was as tall as he was. He had to stretch on his tiptoes to see the top of the workbench. A hammer was as long as his arm. Punchinello swallowed hard. I'm not staying here. And he turned to leave. And then he heard his name. Punchinello. The voice was deep and strong. Sorry, Punchinello. Punchinello stopped. Punchinello, how good to see you. Come and let me have a look at you. Punchinello turned slowly and looked at the large bearded craftsman. You know my name? The little Wemmick asked. Of course I do. I made you. Eli stooped down and picked him up and set him on the bench. The maker spoke thoughtfully as he looked at the grey dots. Looks like you've been given some bad marks. I didn't mean to, Eli. I tried really hard. But you don't have to defend yourself to me, child. I don't care what the other Wemmicks think. You don't? No. And you shouldn't either. Who are they to give stars or dots? They're Wemmicks, just like you. What they think doesn't matter, Punchinello. All that matters is what I think. And I think you're very special. Punchinello laughed. Me? Special? Why? I can't walk fast. I can't jump. My paint is peeling. Why do I matter to you? Eli looked at Punchinello, put his hands on those small wooden shoulders and spoke very slowly. Because you're mine. That's why you matter to me. Punchinello had never had anyone look at him like this, much less his maker. He didn't know what to say. Every day I've been hoping you'd come, Eli explained. I came because I met someone who had no marks, said Punchinello. I know. She told me about you. Why don't the stickers stay on her? The maker spoke softly. Because she has decided that what I think is more important than what they think. The stickers only stick if you let them. What? The stickers only stick if they matter to you. The more you trust my love, the less you care about their stickers. I'm not sure I understand. Eli smiled. You will, but it will take time. You've got a lot of marks. For now, just come to see me every day, and let me remind you how much I care. Eli lifted Punchinello off the bench and set him on the ground. Remember, Eli said as the Wemmick walked out of the door, you are special because I made you and I don't make mistakes. Punchinello didn't stop, but in his heart he thought, I think he really means it. And when he did, a dot fell to the ground. As I reflected on the story, two things kind of came to mind. One is, how are we doing with our generosity of words? And the second is, it doesn't cost us much to give stars, but it could cost a lot to others if we don't.